take it away.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world, please welcome to the T our next special guest. He's the old frisbee freak whose name means good bread and who gave the game a play that will turn a head or three and makes them say, that's something only the older heads know how to throw with great skill from a lifetime of frisbee thrills. He's the emphatic man about town behind the idiosyncratic grip that makes the disc rip with the lip down. And when he showed the Lacey Park boys how to master guts and DDC with all of the frisbee toys, it was plain to see that Charlie and Harold were there to help him win gold. He's the man from back east who had the plan to turn spastic plastic into the golden fleece of frisbee dreams, and westward he wandered to the edge of the blue yonder, living the good life, one of his eternal themes. He's the ultimate master blaster, a Hall of Famer, and a perennial gamer when it comes to fun under the sun with flipping lids and gripping his mitts on that sweet frisbee. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from Washington Crossing in the meaty part of the curve between Pennsylvania and New Jersey, Al B. Bonapane.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Thanks for
Alan,
coming.
Thanks for coming
This
and
is
welcome.
awesome.
I didn't recognize most of that. I think it was about me, but thanks.
I spent
That's
a lot of time in
probably
the
that same
archives.
category of not remembering 57. Well, so let's just jump right in there. One of the first things that we always like to talk about is, well, first of all, Paul already covered it. You're from Washington. You live in Washington Crossing, Pennsylvania. You're halfway between Philly and New York City. One of the things that we like to hear is, what's the story on your PDGA number 296? Did you get that for a specific event? Did you get it just because everybody, was doing that at the time? Did you have to have something for like one of the Rose Bowls or something along that line? What was the story? Could you have been a lower number? I mean, there's just so many different stories about PDGA numbers. So
Yeah, I don't have a good story about having been cheated out of a lower number or anything like that. I was around from the very beginning. I probably could have chased down a lower number if it was important to me, but I just didn't happen to do that. I got mine at Craigmere. The It was supposed to be, like, what's that, May '77. It was supposed to be the world's first PDGA tournament. Turned out to be the second by a day, but we got it. I got mine there. You had to get the number if you when you registered at the meet. And so I guess a couple of hundred of us, probably not that much, but yeah, I got it then. I got it at Craigmere.
Well, especially when you look at the people who are around you. You're 296. Patty Kunkel, we've already interviewed, 283. KB Clark, who we hope to interview, is 284. Jim Kenner, Discraft, 292. Larry Schindel, again, very important to the whole Frisbee story, 293. Mark Dana, 294. Papa Jack, 290. So you were standing in line behind Papa Jack, basically.
Oh, absolutely. And behind me were the Marinis and I think Doug Correa, the Rochester folks. I
Yeah.
think they're 30 something maybe.
Harvey Brand.
And yeah, I remember that, quite distinctly.
That's
And I did want to say, incredibly coincidentally, this morning I got a phone call from my oldest Frisbee acquaintance. I kind of wish it was somebody else, but it happens to be this guy. I played Ultimate with him in high school. Went on to Rutgers, played Ultimate with him, and he was at Craigmere as well. And probably shouldn't say his name. I don't know what authorities might be looking for him, but his number is 200 lower than mine, more than 200 lower than mine, and we got them both at Craigmere, and
Wow.
pretty crazy, and moreover, between his number and my number, I know many of those people, and I know for sure they weren't at the meet. Some of them were in the Midwest, some of them were uh, uh, out west, some were non-playing Whammo execs. So I think you guys know by now, Ed did a lot of, I mean, in addition to reserving some good numbers for some good people, he did a lot of chunking of the numbers. I'm sure he sent a chunk of numbers to this event, that event. And his goal, I'm sure, was to not duplicate numbers as opposed to keep a very strict chronology. And even at Craigmere, for instance, there were, I believe, 3 lines, two or three lines at the registration table. And it's not like they were working off of the master list. I'm sure each registrar at the head of each line had a bunch of numbers that they were just doling out. But I was surprised this morning. I found out for the first time this guy has a number over 200 lower than mine, and he was just like right over there in the other line. I don't know how that
Well, you know, we put so much importance on the PDJ numbers now because it's in the six figures and it's, you know, religiously large. And so we look back to the origin stories and we think there's got to be some kind of master plan to it all. And so it's kind of fun to see the narrative ruined like that.
Well, it's
Well, yeah,
also
he's
funny
yeah.
how a rumor gets started about, oh, this happened because of that, and you know, so on and so forth, and then the truth of the matter is that that's not what happened at all. So you were inducted into the Southern California Disc Golf Sports Hall of Fame in 2023 with Alan Risley, Arthur Coddington, Dave Lewis, Don Wallace, and Gary Perlberg. And then 2022, you were also inducted into the International Frisbee and U.S. Guts Hall of Fame. And I was marveling at this today when I was reading through this again, that the 64th annual IFT, and like, I wouldn't know about the IFT if we hadn't jumped into this whole thing running the Good Times Hour. And I mean, how is it that an event can be going on for 64 years and like a lot of us probably don't know about it, you know?
Oh, the IFT is a crazy tournament. I mean, I often say we were fortunate enough. Foothill Guts was fortunate enough to win it in 1982. So 82 was in comparison the first PDGA year, correct? 1982 was the 25th anniversary of the IFT. The 25th. And if you do that math, it comes in, I think, maybe a year after the Frisbee was invented and started being sold. And famous story now, started out as a family picnic. Somebody found this new toy, thought it would be fun to play some games. They did that year after year after year, and it turned into some prototypical Guts game, and it kept going and going. And here we are, 67 years later by now, or whatever it is. Crazy.
Well, not only is it just kind of so amazing to think that this family picked up this toy 1 year into its presence on the market, but that they were such a forceful personality of family that they invented this game and they drafted basically all of their friends and neighbors to come and play this game with them, and that perpetuated it. I mean, how many times have you had like crazy neighbor experiences where they've come up with the perfect thing, but it never gets perpetuated because no one else is there? It just so happened that the Healy brothers were like, hey, this Guts game is the best thing ever. You got to play with us. And it turned out it was true.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was way back in those dark days, just like, who knows who started playing golf or throwing it towards an object, first. But it's one of the things you do.
Talking about?
It's one of the things you do, right? You throw it at someone to see if they can catch it. And whether it's how close you can get, how far away you can be, or how fast you can throw it, it's a very basic thing to do with the disc. And so glad they, like you said, they were forceful enough, had the resolve to just keep it up and keep it going.
Yeah,
it's really amazing. I mean, it's that I feel like I need to go to that tournament now, and I also feel like I need to go to the Virginia State Championships, because like how can those go on so long? And like, I didn't know anything about either one of them. I mean, Virginia State Championships was easier to know about, but the IFT, obviously, how can
IFT
the aficionado?
Well, IFT is challenging. I mean, I certainly don't want to keep you from going there, but IFT is challenging. It's way up there, and it is just Guts, but it's such an essential part of our history. Virginia State is a great tournament. It's one of the few overalls that we still have, and great people, great location, famously great food, and it's a wonderful time. Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to the last weekend.
Yep, you'll love it, believe me.
Yeah, I think that's on the list for next year. So wrapping up the framework, you're a multiple world champion, national champion, regional. You've got regional titles in ultimate, guts, and double disc court. And obviously, we're going to dig way deep into this, but you worked at WAMO and the International Frisbee Association at the same time. And again, like that's one of the things we want to hear about. Is the
Yeah.
behind the scenes sort of thing, and like what was it like at the time. And you don't have to go into it right this second, but one of the things that fascinates me coming from the entertainment business as a lighting guy and working in all different venues over the last 30 years, it really fascinates me how much, I say this all the time, like you guys swam through the narrow end of the funnel renting the Rose Bowl and being one of the first non-football activities in a structure like that. And now look at all of them. I mean, like one of the things, I sent Stork a link the other day after the U.S. swimming uh, qualifiers for the Olympics, and they set that up in Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. They had 3 different pools in that football stadium, and they did all the qualifying in those pools and the warm up and the warm down. And like that, I think you can go right back to the Rose Bowl in the '70s, making those kind of events happen. Like anything from a frisbee event to a monster truck event has happened in buildings like that, and all stops in between. So it's definitely fascinating to me to go, wow, that goes back to then.
Well,
Yeah,
sorry, Gal, go ahead.
oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say exactly right. The Rose Bowl was, vitally important. To our sport, had such cachet and great marketing value, and perhaps in some regard not the very best place for a tournament. It
Oh,
wasn't the Rose Bowl itself, of course, was just the final day, and half of that final day uh, were just demos, and then the other half were actual competitive finals. But the rest of WFC, the World Frisbee Championships, was the week before, in and around the Rose Bowl and in nearby colleges or things like that. But the Rose Bowl itself, that final day, it's it's an iconic, great place, and just so very privileged to have been a part of that.
Well, we're gonna get you. We're gonna take everybody here with us on the ride to the Rose Bowl 76, 77, 78, and beyond. But before we get there, I want to take you back to your origin and the kind of the origin story of you and frisbee and you and your grip are kind of at the same time almost. You are playing in your backyard and you have a red flying saucer and you're just messing around with different grips. I believe you're by yourself, just messing around with different grips. Is that true? You're by yourself when you come to this revelation?
It is. Unfortunately, the other neighborhood kids, they were like more into Tonka trucks and army men, and I wasn't quite into that. And I sometimes got them to play catch, but not very often. And so I was in my big backyard. We had a brook in the backyard, a lot of trees, a lot of wooded area, and my flying saucer, which I happen to have right here. My flying saucer my flying saucer was a flying saucer. It was a disabled flying saucer that was coming
Oh,
in for a crash landing, and it had to go over this bush and short of this wall before it hit the water. And I just did that. I know it sounds pathetic, but I did that hours on end, years on end. And by the way, before I continue, even though I've known Stork since 1974, it wasn't until just recently I discovered that one of his early prized discs was a red flying saucer as well,
wow.
and we had a pretty good chuckle about that. But the thing that I think is really amazing about this disc is that I was doing my grip back then, 8 or 10 years old, just jamming my thumb into the flight plate, throwing it because I thought it gave me a bit more power, a bit more spin. And there's not a crack on that disc, and I kept
that's
that in
pretty
a toy
amazing.
box in a toy box in the basement, in the attic, everywhere. There's just I mean, it's the worst for wear, but there's not a crack in that flight plate, which is just amazing.
There's something to say about now we have modern planned obsolescence, but back then they really built things to last, didn't they?
Oh, it's a. Don't get me wrong. It's a thin, fragile, light thing, but it's amazing that it's still intact.
So,
And then
so
one of
when
the things.
you
I'm sorry.
go ahead, the one thing.
Go ahead. I was just going to say one of the things, just to inch forward a little bit from that time period, is one of the things that I guess was helpful to me in my development in the older kids in the neighborhood. We used to play all forms of tag, and we would play paper tag, where you'd roll up a newspaper or a magazine, tape the sharp edges towards the inside, like a baton, and just throw it at people. And the parents would join in, and we play all sorts of tag. And one of them was the frisbee tag, the game that we played. So not exactly guts; you weren't supposed to catch it, but we were throwing discs very hard at one another in very close distance, and it was the kind of thing that always, I guess, appealed to me. And 20 years later, I was able to do that competitively, I guess.
So how young are you when you're in your backyard and you're playing and you're practicing with your grip, and then you're playing frisbee tag? Like, what are you, about between 10 and 14, roughly?
Oh, younger than that. Younger than that. I'd say I'd
Wow.
probably eight to 10, something like that.
And you kind of enter the historical record, in an interesting side note, and we're not drawing a lot of extra media attention to this, but you did participate in the first competitive ultimate, the high school ever, first high school ultimate game. It was St. Joseph's versus Columbus, or Columbia, excuse me, and I believe you played for Columbia, and you were on the losing end of one of the most historic upsets, not an upset, but a extremely wide margin.
Not not quite, on a couple of counts.
Okay.
That wasn't the first. That wasn't the first high school game. It was my first high school game, but
Okay.
it was a very early game.
And we're talking
Ultimate, of course, started.
1972.
That was 72. Columbia High School in New Jersey invented Ultimate, probably late 60s, I think it was, 68, 69. And So it started out before it got to clubs, before it got to universities. It was just a New Jersey uh, uh, high school competitive thing. And
Wow.
72 happened to be my first game. Not only was it it was really my school's first game that we were reading the rules. We were reading the rules on the way to play Columbia High School. The guys who invented the game. And when we got there, they played, by the way, on a parking lot, pretty famous parking lot. You don't usually think of playing Ultimate on a parking lot, but they did. And yeah, it was pretty funny. Those guys were good, but we managed to. I always tell the story this way. We managed to score the first goal. Felt pretty good about that. Then they tied it up. We scored the second goal. Felt very good about that. But then they rallied and tied it up. And then the next thing I remember was 22-2. And then it was all a blur, and we wound up losing 64-3, something like that. So they showed no mercy, but I made lifelong friends that day, and it was a great story and a great time.
Well, it's just such a great story. The origin stories and the connections to it all. The fact that you were there at the high school in the area where Ultimate was invented. Obviously, Irv and Dan are the ones that are credited with inventing it. But you were kind of considered, if we look at the next generation of Ultimate, the fires passed along. They recruited you, and this is going to get into your whole grip story. But the two of them are involved in the discovery of your grip, isn't that right, Mace?
That's correct.
Yeah, that's our sport has a lot of great first meeting stories, so to speak, between people, and that's what mine was. That high school, St. Joe's. You would think if we were playing Ultimate in 1972, that we would have had some sort of famous Ultimate evangelist on our team, but we didn't. We didn't. Nobody on our team knew anybody like that. it's just a credit to our faculty advisors that they found this relatively new sport that other high schools were playing, and they got a team together for us, and um, they. So I played there a couple of years, and then went to Rutgers. And I heard that Rutgers had a team. I didn't realize it was the team and how good they were, and I certainly didn't know anybody on the team. And I was having trouble finding the team when I got to Rutgers. And of course, it's a little bit before Google and social media and all that. But I was fortunate enough to find the social media of the time, which was just a poster stapled to a telephone pole that was advertising a beginning frisbee class, a non-credit after-hours thing in some little gym on the fringe of the campus. And I didn't think I was, a beginner really, because I was playing for a couple of years, but I figured I'd go there just to see if those guys knew anything about the team and could point me in the right direction. So I walked into that little gym, and yeah, and there's I didn't know them, of course, but there's Dan Stork-Roddick and Irv Dr. Eichel, two of the great champions of the sport at that time, two of the great organizers, and my life changed that evening, absolutely. And one of the very first things they had us do. So of course I went through the motions of the class. But one of the first things they had us do was to start. Knelt down by the throwers and had us throw across the gym to Irv. And so I held the disc in my grip because I didn't really use that grip for special purposes. I use that all the time. I've used that grip every time I've ever thrown any backhand in my entire life. And so I just picked up that disc and in the grip, and I threw it to him. And then it was kind of you really you hold it like that, that sort of thing. But yeah, that was the moment I met those guys, and my life changed for sure.
So, since there's probably a lot of people that are going to see this episode at some point or another that have no idea what the Bonapane grip is, why don't you go ahead and give us a demonstration of that?
So so see if I can get my camera straight. Yeah, so I have my fingers curled under, except maybe the pinky. The pinky's off the rim on the bottom, and I've curled my index finger all the way up onto my thumb. And what a lot of people think about, which is true, again, pardon me if I'm getting the camera wrong, if you just hold it, the disc flat and curl the finger up, the nose is going to just go down. And that's good for several things. But it doesn't have to be. It depends on what you do with the wrist, whether you pronate, supinate. You can throw it without a nose down. You can throw it with a nose up. And that was one of the very first things that I did to great advantage. Playing Ultimate was to throw air bounces, underneath the defender's arm. And I could do that with the disc because I would so what's that going to be? I would pronate, go and jam the thumb down into the flight plate, and it made especially bouncing a big old heavy thing like a master a lot easier.
I love the when looking at the research, when looking at that epic meeting between you and Irv and Stork, and the grip is pointed out. First Stork sees it, he says, Irv, you got to come over here and see this grip. And Irv looks at it, and they kind of wow, I've never seen this before. And these are Stork, we're hopefully going to have him on the show, but he's largely credited with the whole idea of Eastern trick catch. I mean, him and his dad going around playing catch all the time, that was one of the early legendary origin stories. And Irv says to you, oh, by the way, that grip's not going to work. And you're a freshman. These guys are like seniors, maybe even older. Your cheeky response was?
It seems to work for me. I think I believe I said. But no, that's not anything. Hey, look, I was a kid. It's not like I was good or anything, but it did work for me. And yeah, I think Stork was a graduate student at that time, and Irv would have been a sophomore in college at that time. But yeah, Stork tells the story for sure that he was already trying to figure out how he was going to convince me to lose that grip entirely, and he was going to show me how to throw correctly. But fortunately, that never happened.
That's really interesting though that you never used another grip at all ever, and that's I mean it. I mean it's obviously from the root of your game, but it nothing ever tempted you to try something else at all.
No, and in fact, it's what I've always used as my excuse for being such a lousy putter, because that's the only time I ever really hold the disc in any kind of normal backhand fashion is to
Right.
putt. And to me, it seems like I'm throwing lefty. It just seems so different.
That's
Because
interesting.
again, I've always thrown that, and the challenging part is, and a lot of people might not even believe it, but to to play ultimate, um, and to dive, catch it with one hand, roll, get up, throw it very quickly, to get it into that grip with uh, maybe not even another hand. I might have to brush it against my body or just put it into that grip very, very quickly. It's tough because a lot of people kind of have to use the other, and I will too if I have time. I'll use my other hand and load it in there, push it down deep in between my forefinger and middle finger. But the toughest part was probably playing Ultimate, the biggest disc with the highest rim. But I did that so often, so early on. Everything else was really easy. Obviously, you have a lot of time to load it when you play guts, but some DDC throws are very quick, and but that's such a small disc with such a narrow rim, um, shallow rim. Very easy to get it in there. But again, it's just because I've practiced it forever. I mean, it's not, and for that reason, I was always hesitant to really to recommend that people use it because it's an unusual, painful thing, and it's a commitment. It's a commitment to use it, and it comes in handy. It's certainly an advantage sometimes, but it's not just something you do just to do. I mean, it's unusual.
The only
So
time I ever actually saw, sorry, Mace, but the only
no,
time I ever actually saw someone throw a golf disc with the Bonapane grip, and I didn't know it was called the Bonapane grip until we started doing the research for this. But there's a guy from our area here, Kevin Naismith. He's a retired firefighter, and he's one of those older school guys who rely on some more trick plastic or trick kind of throws. And when I'd see him go for the big throws, he would put his thumb, his finger over his thumb, and I thought that's his version of going back into the power grip. I had no idea. I don't even know if he knew that it came from you, but that's an interesting little connection there. And to all of our Toronto homies, that's where Kevy got it.
Yeah, I don't know that. I think I've seen people put the forefinger on the top of the disc just to do it, but to curl it way back is yeah, I don't know if you would do that just to do it. You'd probably have to have heard about that and wanted to try it, but for sure. And by the way, there's speaking of it being a named uh, grip. What's kind of funny is. So 1977 was the first time Foothill Guts went back to the Midwest, Upper Peninsula of Michigan, the UP, to play guts, and that's where people first first saw my grip. And then the very following year, in '78, that was the first GPA Worlds in Toronto, and I was warming up, and I was um, so people were able to get relatively close to me. So one guy walks up to me and he looks at my grip. And he goes, "Oh, I see you're using the UP Power Grip." So in the last year, somehow it morphed from my grip went at the IFT to the UP Power Grip, and like my teammates Irv and everybody else, they just started cracking up. But I didn't think it was all that funny, but it was actually pretty fun.
that's a good one. Well, like I played the first person I ever saw use it was an old school guy from around here named Dave Drass, who doesn't live around this area anymore. But I remember him taping his bottom finger. Like I remember seeing him show up in the parking lot, and I'd met him, but I hadn't played with him. And then we drew each other on the cards for the mini tournament that day, and he used it a lot. But he used a lot of tape on his middle finger. And I seem to remember Harold doing that too, and Harold still does it. So that was one of the next things on my script was you got some big names that have used it, like the four big names from Innova, Harold and Charlie and Duval, and then Dave Dunapace, obviously, and Tim Selinsky. And that's a pretty impressive list on its own right there. And I've try to play around with Harold every year at USCGC. It doesn't always happen because he's a busy man, but he still uses it. He doesn't use it all the time, but he still uses it.
Oh, those guys. Well, actually, just real quick before I talk about those guys, absolutely, you have to tape your finger. And if I go to something like a wedding or a picnic, or I could be in a suit, but if there's any possibility that I'm going to be throwing a disc just for fun later on, I always have tape and band-aids in my pocket. I mean, I couldn't. I would start bleeding with the first throw. Especially if it's an old disc that has a messed up rim. But yeah, you absolutely have to tape up. And those guys say, it's just a joy to hear their names. Didn't hang around too much with Dave. I certainly saw him in many places, many times. But Charlie, Harold, and Ski, we went to Lacey Park, in San Marino, and practiced every day. And I worked with Ski. He worked at the IFA and Whammo at the same time that I did. And we played all the time. And I played with all of them at different times as a DDC partner. Charlie is one of the best guts players in the world. He played on Foothill. So yeah, I know those guys. And Ski practiced with us all the time. He legendarily great hands. He's such a great catch. Yeah, I played with those guys all the time. And yeah, I started throwing the grip. They saw it, tried it, liked it, and they were really they spread it more than I did, especially Harold. With his
Harold took it to the East Coast, took it back to the East Coast for you.
Yeah, of course I was. Yeah, we skipped that part of my going from the East Coast to the West Coast. But yeah, I was out in California at the time, and when playing with all those guys, and Charlie used it for throwing backhand burns in DDC. He used it for throwing guts exclusively, and yeah, those guys were. Like I said, they spread the word more than I did.
Now, in terms of spreading the word, I know. So, just to put it in a little context, we're talking in the 70s. We're talking about Whammo kind of having the total control over the Frisbee promotion, the Frisbee culture in a way, or at least a guiding hand. And so they had the Frisbee World magazine, which morphed into the Frisbee Disc World magazine. And Volume 5, number 1, you wrote the famous article, The Grip. And you talked about the use of this grip in all of the different disciplines. And I'm going to quote you on this because I had a great time reading this, and it was great. Talking about guts, you say this is probably the easiest way to become acquainted with it. And it's, as you've already said, that's the number one default grip for Charlie and Harold in guts. It was also good for self-caught flight because it was great for penetration and also for the comfort of the throw. DDC, obviously, you've just talked about that. That was a great application to it. Some people used it in distance, but it was a little less. It was a bit of a loose cannon sometimes, and control problems could have been the thing. Golf is when you said that'll be the last place people should feel confident to use it. I imagine it's because of the touch that's required. And this, we brought this up when we talked to Bill Wright, because we talked to Bill Wright about freestyle and about, because that was his jam back in the late 70s. But you said, and I quote, "I forbid the use of my grip in this freestyle, what I consider an amusing diversion from true display." In parentheses, don't worry, none of them bothered to read this article anyways. Do you remember having any blowback from that article?
Well, that entire article was, of course, tongue in cheek. There were factual representations, strewn about. Sure. But I had great fun with that, and it's a good example of what I was able to get away with, because that I wouldn't want to call it censored, but that was a Whammo publication. I mean, we just couldn't write anything we wanted to write, and people were reading that. Stork was the editor, but that went out, under the with the good graces of Whammo, and I occasionally got in trouble, but not for that.
Not for
But
that. That's a
but yeah, and I don't freestyle, and a lot of freestyle friends, of course. But yeah, that was just a little poke at them, and it would have absolutely no application in freestyle. But yeah, I was just having an awful lot of fun with that. But another thing to again, the disc is the grip is very unusual, very awkward. Certainly, if you were going to throw a drive with it, you'd have to be extremely comfortable. But remember, that's it's speaking of IFT, a couple of weeks ago, I went to the most recent IFT, and it's just I'm just so tickled that it's still the predominant backhand grip, for guts,
It will
and
never work.
it's not so much, and it's pretty funny, right? Because not only were these guys not around, but their parents probably weren't around, when I first started throwing it. But it's not because they're throwing flat tipping backhands. It's really just the way, and it's the same reason why Charlie and Harold and all those guys started throwing it early on for distance and golf, as well as DC and guts, is that it does seem to just jump out of your hand, and depending upon what you do with the leading edge, it could dip, it could bounce, it could just be perfectly neutral. Um, but yeah, the whole nose down thing for distance and for self golf flight, I hear that all the time. But again, when I was 8 years old, it's not like I was throwing an awful lot of TRC and MTA. It just seemed to get me a bit more spin, a bit more power out of my hand. And I think I know that's why, for instance, the Charlie and Harold started using it, and why the Guts guys are still using it today.
Well, let me just one final note regarding Bill Wright. He did say when we asked him about the bonnet band grip, and I asked him about that article, and he doesn't remember reading that, but he was incensed historically for his old historical self on the basis of that. But he did say that he used to use your grip when he played golf because that would help protect his nail. He had his
Yeah, I
press
remember
on
that.
nails. So
Absolutely. And I just saw Bill a couple of weeks ago in Colorado, and we had a great time. He was very friendly. So apparently he did in fact forget that article. So that's great.
So let me ask you a guts question real quick, because this really just occurred to me. But I have a couple friends that are from the Lower Peninsula, old school frisbee friends in particular, and like one of them's from Midland, Michigan, which is kind of in the middle of the mitten, like probably like right in there
Yeah.
somewhere. And he's a big Guts fan, and he's a big player. He plays still, and but was that kind of a Michigan thing? The Guts was super popular in Michigan, or is it just kind of coincidence that I know a couple other people that play Guts from the Lower Peninsula, as opposed to
Oh,
where you
definitely a Michigan thing. Again, the Heelys up in Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Michigan in general, like I said, Midland, Detroit, Chicago and Wisconsin as well. But absolutely, it's a Midwestern sport, and we we never played guts on the West Coast. All those successful years that we had, Foothill again, and then in LA. We never played guts on the West Coast. There's nobody else playing there. Very, very little play on the East Coast. I think maybe a little bit up in Rochester, but it was absolutely primarily a Midwestern sport.
interesting. So I want to ask you, this is a really interesting thing that happened just in terms of like the frisbee culture, the shift. We've got Dan Stork Roddick, PDJ number 3. We've got Irv, Dr. I, Calb, uh, both of them classmates and fraternity or frisbee fraternity members in at Rutgers, coming from the East Coast, and then you come in along as a junior. Um, all of a sudden, there's a big exodus to the West Coast. I know how Stork fits into the whole story. Maybe there's people who don't know much about Irv Kalb. Can you talk more about Irv and his place in the history books and who he was in your journey in the Frisbee story?
Oh, I sure can. And at the most recent IFT, Irv was just inducted into the Hall of Fame up there. He's a terrifically important person. He again back to those late '60s when Columbia High School, the very early guys, those would have been upperclassmen to Irv when Irv was in high school. Yeah, all credit to them. They invented the sport of ultimate, but they didn't take it too terrifically seriously, or at least not as seriously as they could have. It was a it was a alternative, late '60s. It was alternative, countercultural, just a lot of fun. And Irv saw it as what it has, for instance, become today. I mean, a legit sport played by super athletic people with great spectator appeal. And when those guys uh, graduated, Irv's upperclassmen, the guys who invented it, when they graduated, went to their colleges, they didn't really push it too hard at their colleges. Didn't really catch on. It was Irv in his final years at Columbia High School, uh, organized statewide play, and then went to Rutgers, became the captain of Rutgers there, and was the of ultimate there at Rutgers. Undefeated national champions for 4 years. I was lucky enough to be around for the final two of those. Um, Irv's classmates from CHS, my good friend John Cohn, other guys went to their schools. Many of them Ivy League, became captains there, and that's the way the sport spread. And Irv was the guy. Irv was the guy who primarily started that. He took over the rules. He revised them. He honed them for competitive play, and was absolutely, without question, not just because he was a friend and teammate, but without question, he was the finest ultimate player of his generation. Terrifically strong backhand, a great field sense, and a big guy, a very athletic guy. In fact, I think he was played wide receiver for Rutgers football for a while at the same time.
Wow.
But speaking of the same time, he wasn't just an ultimate guy. So I came around to Rutgers in '74. In '75, he and Stork go out to the Rose Bowl, and they win the world freestyle pairs competition. And Irv was a very early, really excellent freestylist, the kind of guy who was inventing moves and wowing crowds when crowds were just starting to be wowed by freestylists, and consider the disparate skill set to be a champion ultimate player and a champion frisbee freestyle player. That's pretty crazy. And then a couple 3 years later, add to that mix Irv playing with us on Foothill Guts, and now he's a world Guts champion. So he's a world Guts champion, a world ultimate champion, national champion, but essentially when national was world, and a world freestyle champion. That's crazy. I mean, that's a very short list of people who can say that they've done that. And he was, yeah, absolutely an elite player. And I, again, just so happy that he was my mentor of all things frisbee early on. Stork kind of sort of became my mentor once I got out to California. But Irv was absolutely a great guy, great player, terrifically important to the sport of ultimate.
And maybe you could just pick up there and elaborate more on how did you get to California? Did Irv lead you out to California, or did you lead Irv, or was there any relation at all?
Oh no, absolutely. Irv led me. So he was 2 years my senior. He graduated and got a position. He was a programmer. Got a position in California. The company was going to relocate him out there, and he asked, rather than flying him out there, can you cover expenses if I drive out, cover gas and hotels and such? And they said yes. And then he asked me, hey, you want to just share some driving and go across country? we'll hit some. There weren't too
See,
many
you do have
tournaments
a
then,
great red story.
but we did hit some tournaments. We did stay at some frisbee players' houses, and when I got to California, I was just supposed to. Well, before that, so our first trip was down to Alabama. So that's where um, um, Frisbee South and in Florence, and
Sky
I guess it
South.
was. I guess it was Florence, and then so
Oh
Tom
yeah,
Monroe,
Florence.
Cynthia Allen, Deborah Strasser, all those guys, and then of course other people, other a lot of folks I believe from Chicago went down there. For the first time when I really met people outside of Rutgers Ultimate. I met a few of them when they came to New Brunswick for the Octet overall the previous 2 years, but the touring NAS folks, a lot of them, I saw them first in Huntsville. Anyway, then we meandered across, and when I got to there, I was supposed to just fly back when we got to California, but that was when Patty Hipsky, as she elaborated really wonderfully with all her photos, was with uh, Jose in Germany doing that tour that they were on, and she was working at the IFA at the time, which is a department of WAMO, and so Stark offered for me, just to have a summer job to cover for her while she's in Germany. So of course I took that.
Here's one of
And
your pay stubs from Whammo.
Yeah, no, well, I wish that was a pay stub. Unfortunately,
Was that a
that's
bill?
the first that's the first place prize money for winning DDC in 1978,
Obviously, I didn't
Wow.
know.
which was a lot of money. Which was a lot of money back then. It flew away for sure, but that's what that was. But anyway, so I spent the summer, and then at the end of the summer, so I remember, so I was at Rutgers. I was in Rutgers Electrical Engineering for 2 years, and this is the summer between sophomore and junior. And at the end of the summer, Stork offered a full time position for me at the IFA, uh, uh, even though Patty had come back at that point. And of course, I took it. What was I supposed to do? And that was a great phone call that I had with my dad, saying that I was going to quit engineering school, to work basically minimum wage at the IFA. So, but I did,
That's
and glad I
incredible.
did.
That's also a common theme with a lot of the folks from your era, where they had, like Patty told us a story like that too, where she had to call her parents back up and go, "Yeah, I'm not coming back to school." And I mean, I'm sure there was more involved to that, but that was basically the gist of the conversation. And I can imagine. I mean, my parents weren't that happy when I started wandering around the country selling these plastic widgets out of the back of my van either, but they had already given up on reining me in at that point for sure. So.
I love the
Oh
quote
yeah.
the quote you provided, Mace Man. So this trip with Irv went from a 2-week trip to a summer job to 7 years of employment, and all of a sudden you find yourself California dreaming every day for 7 years, right in the nexus of it all, and you're working in the house that was IFA headquarters. You're working with Ski, you're working with Stork. Were you working with Joe? Was she still working there at the time?
Sure was. She was my boss. Um, the house came a little bit later. I know Patty covered it
Okay.
in good detail. Uh, the IFA was originally, we're only talking about across the street, but IFA was originally within WAMO proper. Then they started running out of room, and then they developed a couple, or then they set up a couple of trailers on the property for not just the IFA, but a couple other departments. And then they bought this house, and amazingly, we got it. I don't know how Stork or how they decided that we should get it, but it was great. I think what happened was there was uh, perhaps there was a cul-de-sac next to WAMO, and then an empty lot, and so that and WAMO bought everything around it, so that cul-de-sac kind of sort of turned into a long driveway. So when you got to WAMO, just drove right past it, went down to the little IFA house that was on the end of that drive. So we were
Wow.
part of WAMO. We we walked across the street to the plant, to people's offices all the time. But hey, we got to be in our own little house. We had our offices. We each had a little bedroom, in the house. Had a kitchen. Didn't use it too much, but it was there, and it was great. Just absolutely great.
That's incredible. That's awesome. So
Yeah.
before we move on, I know that there's something you and Tim occupy a space in the record books. Maybe Mace, you could talk a bit more about this.
I'm sorry, Paul. Can you repeat that?
You guys, you have a page. I don't know if they still have the page in the Guinness Book of World Records, but you did for the
Oh,
longest time. And Mace, maybe you could
oh,
set
that
this
was
up.
sure.
Yeah,
That was great fun. It was
1980.
1980, I believe.
That world's
Yeah, 1980 we did that.
fastest throw record.
Yeah, there's a bit of a backstory there that you don't mind me launching
Not at
into
all.
it. One day, Stork came into my office and said, "Hey, we need a world's fastest throw record." Now, at the time, the IFA was the clearinghouse for Guinness Book of World Records for disc related records. So they had no the Guinness people, like everything else they publish, I imagine, have no close knowledge of it. They rely on other organizations to forward them records, and so we would forward them the records that we thought that people would be most interested in. There are a great number of records that are just kind of obscure, but things like distance and whatever would be of interest to people. So he said, "Hey, we need a world's fastest throw record," and uh, he asked me not because he thought I was a candidate to set it, which I might have been, but it was mainly because that was part of my job, really, is to spitball that kind of stuff with him, and to see how we would set up the protocol. And one of them, at the time there were radar guns. They were expensive, but we figured we would use radar. But we wouldn't, for instance, want someone to go out in their backyard, and with the radar gun and just throw it straight down to the ground and measure the speed. It wasn't part of an actual, what you would think of as a frisbee throw. And so then we were thinking of things like, do we set up a gun by a distance line, and to get it, right at the point of release at a distance tournament. But that wouldn't really work either. It would be distracting. There are typically 5 sites at throwing at once, just for the sake of having the same win. Are you going to have 5 different guns? Similarly, we thought about, well, do we have a gun at the end of a T-pad where it's just a full power drive? Again, probably distracting for folks. They might not like that. There's going to have to be a person laying down there looking at the gun as well. Remember, not too much remote, nifty stuff like we have today. It's going to be a person there with a gun. So, and guts obviously came up as a possibility, but it's kind of tough to get right behind or right in front of a thrower. That's the way that radar works, right? You definitely don't want to shoot side. You want to shoot right, in front of the disc or right behind the disc. Kind of tough to get close enough to do that in a game of guts, but we thought we were on something closer. So we thought a nice protocol would be that the world's fastest throw would have to be a legal guts throw. So it would have to be across the 14 meters. It couldn't be vertical. And when you, as far as someone being on the other end, it might be kind of iffy if it was high or not, or wide or not, or short or not, just like it is in competitive guts today. So we decided, why don't we have it just be terminated in a clean one-handed catch? So you have to throw a legal guts throw that is caught cleanly, and so that's what we did. And my 2 Foothill Guts teammates, Steve McLean and Charlie Duvall, they set the first record that was printed in the Guinness book first. I'm thinking of 79, maybe. I don't have a copy of it. But unfortunately, Charlie was throwing, Steve was catching. It was recorded as 60 miles an hour because they had a state trooper there, so there's some cop there with a gun, and he was shooting it perfectly perpendicular to the path of the disc, and you're going to get such a slow reading. I mean, they got it at 60, and I can assure you that Charlie's first warm up throw was like 65. So I mean, 60 was not quite right. And then come the next year, Charlie again, Scott Zimmerman. I'm sure you know Scott, the finest frisbee player ever to walk the earth. Myself and Ski, we went to Lacey Park again with the gun on the tripod, and we had the three of us, Charlie, Scott, myself, just bombarding Ski for a half hour, an hour until we just threw our arms out, and we were all throwing the same speed. We were all, we knew that we were all on the same team. We practiced with radar guns all the time, and I was fortunate enough to eke one out 1 mile an hour faster than those guys, and Ski caught it. And that's really the hard part too. Like even a guy as with the great hands that Ski had, at those speeds, you can't throw it at his ankles. You can't throw it up high. You can't throw it off to the side. He's not going to catch up to it. So you kind of sort of have to throw it near his hands in the neutral defensive position. And so it takes a while for you to have the energy to do that. Get it close enough that he can try to catch it, have him either be able to catch it or not. So it took the better part of an afternoon, but also again, one of the 1,000 things that was just great fun. So and that record, probably because people weren't interested in breaking it, stood for a very long time. I think it was 10, 15 years before it was broken. So it was great fun. We got a lot of great mileage out of that.
So
I can only imagine what Ski's hands must have looked like at the end of that hour.
Oh yeah. Oh well. Again, we played guts all the time, practiced all the time, and I'm sure they were black and blue. And since that time, the records have the speed records have broadened a bit. Now there is, in addition to the guts speed catch, as that's called, there is just a fastest throw record that is not constrained by catches or a legal guts throw, and many other things, and many other discs as well. Of course, we were throwing a pro, by the way. You had to throw a guts.
This is the other thing. You're throwing a speed 2 disc, 70 miles an hour. But here's what I find so fascinating is that one of the founding members of the Beveled Edge Hall of Fame that's kind of propelled disc golf into its own stratosphere, he was the guy that was on the catching end of that. I think that's fascinating. Tim Solinsky. Another reason why we love the Ski.
Well, I got 2 questions. Okay, well, actually, I have 3. The first 2 come together. One is, what was the first record? And then what is the current record? What was the record that you set? How fast was that?
Well, like I said, that first one, which was aberrant, really was 60. Mine was 74, and the current one now is in kilometers per. So I don't really know precisely what it is, but it's significantly faster. I wouldn't be surprised it would be more like 83, 84, something like that. I'd have to look that up, but I think low to mid 80s. That's what guys are throwing guts these days. Is about that fast.
Then my second,
and I know that's what the golf guys do, or are throwing about that.
82,
well, right?
83, 84, I think is tops for golf.
Yeah, when they have
to this
those.
day. Well, so my other question is like you said earlier that nobody was playing guts on the West Coast, but I've heard from plenty of people that Ski was prolific. So how did he get to be so good if nobody was playing out there? Or was it just y'all, like a few of y'all Whammo people that were playing at the time? Because I've heard for years that Ski could throw it hard and he could take a big catch too. And so.
Well, what I meant by that earlier comment, but that was that there wasn't a lot of team play.
Oh, okay. All right. That makes sense
in California, as opposed to Again, you're talking about Midland and Detroit
Oh yeah,
and
Michigan is going crazy.
and Heartland and all those places. Those guys, they could have 10 teams at a practice or on a weekend, just playing. Um, we had uh, we had just us, we just Foothill. Not only did we just have Foothill, one of our guys we picked up, Tom Field, another great player, Hall of Fame guy. He lived in the Midwest, and we picked him up when we would go back there. So there was really just the four of us Foothill, when we played. And sometimes it was even worse than that because Irv, remember when he got his job and was relocated, he was on the west side of LA, and we were all on the east side of LA. And even back then, driving across LA was not something that you wanted to do. So when we practiced guts, usually indoors at the San Marino High School gym, we played 1-on-3 or 1-on-4, just with a stack of discs and a radar gun. The thrower would throw a stack of discs until they were tired, until the radar gun showed that you were losing your form and losing your speed, and then you would just rotate through. Another guy would come in, you go out there and catch. So we really just practiced those elements of the game, the basics of the game, for months and months and months. And then when we would go back to the World Championships, or to the IFT, we would actually play guts for the first time, an actual game of guts. We would play for the
Wow,
first time,
Uh,
and
that's
you
cool.
could we could get it we could get away with that because you didn't really have to practice like scrambling for a deflection and diving and catching it, because we did that all the time. We did that in playing Ultimate. We did that playing guts. Um, but we practiced the throwing part and the catching part outside of a game. So I'm sorry, that's what I meant when I said that there wasn't a lot of um, guts play as far as teams go, because we didn't even have enough teams to play, enough people to play within Foothill 3-on-3. We didn't have that many people, so we really just practiced elements of the game. And outside of Foothill, very few people, I'd say none. Nobody was really playing guts. When people came through the town, like for WFC, they were more than happy to throw at us. Guys like Kirkland and Monroe and Westerfield and all those of the Joe Youngman. Well, he was a cuss player. All these big guys coming in would be happy to bombard us, but they're not going to stand there and take our throws on the way back. So it was really tough to get a lot of people, anybody to play guns. But you're right, Ski was excellent. He had an excellent throw. Like I said, legendary hands, not just in guts, but in DDC as well. And uh, absolutely an excellent player.
And
now,
also one of the nicest people to spend time with ever in the history of
absolutely,
ever.
in the
And like
history
the
of ever.
funniest guy in the world. And like I said, so just so thankful that I got to work with him every day and play with him every day for a good number of years. It was and go on road trips. I did have, my road trips were sort of confined to uh, the West Coast, California, because I didn't really fly around there like I typically would fly back to the IFA and the WAMO tournaments, throughout the country. We would drive up and down the coast, and got to be in the back of a truck going up to San Francisco with Ski. Your side would be splitting by the time you got there.
I was just sitting here thinking about like how, I mean, anybody that's listening to us right now, and if they knew Tim, they would probably feel the same way. But like I don't feel like I ever got too much of him, and like I certainly feel like I didn't get enough in terms of just the way that that he would act and treat you, and just be so much fun to be around, and such a just constantly saying things that really meant something, and I could only imagine how cool it must have been to have like grown into adulthood with him, and have it like a lot of your developing your adult habits. And I don't mean that in any bad way at all. Just what are we going to do this weekend? Oh, we're going to hang out with Tim, and we're going up to San Francisco to play frisbee, and and then Monday I'm going to see him at work, and I mean, like, it's not very often that you get to be that close to a person like that, and spend so much time, and just it's I mean, it's inevitable that he added some fiber to your fabric over those days, and obviously you did for him as well. And that's another really cool aspect of your origin story.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was all that and more. And he was a few years younger than I was, as were Charlie and Harold. And just like Irv was a bit older than I was, and Stork even older than that. We know how old Stork is. So it was kind of fun to have some younger guys who maybe were doing some things that I was trying to do, just like I was trying to do some things that Irv and Stork were trying to do. It was a nice little continuum, that we had there. But of course, everybody just progressed so fast. I mean, you turn around and Charlie's a multiple champion, and Harold, the skinny little kid Harold, is winning world golf championships, and it was just crazy times.
So you've mentioned a couple times Foothill, and for those who may not know, what you're referring to is officially it's the frisbee club called the Foothill Institute of Frisbee Culture. What who came up with that title? Where does that come from? Who is the Frisbee Institute of Frisbee Culture? The Foothill Institute of Frisbee Culture.
Uh, that's that's a Stork thing. So many things
Right.
are Stork things, and I can't believe I don't have a Foothill shirt with me. It's across the hall. I have as many as you like, but if if you saw a picture of that shirt, nice little foothills, California foothills artwork, and then the lettering, that was a complete ripoff, or perhaps I should say homage to the California Institute of Technology, Caltech,
Okay.
which was just down the
Oh,
street.
okay.
So Stork took that. I'll blame him. I'm sure the statute of limitations is long past. He took that and changed the lettering to Foothill Institute of Frisbee Culture. But we never really went by that. Of course, it's quite a mouthful. So we just call ourselves Foothill, and it was primarily Foothill Ultimate and Foothill
Right.
Guts. We had an excellent ultimate team, state champions one year. We
Mhm.
always played the Condors as close as you could play them. We usually wound up losing by a goal or two, those bastards. But it was a very strong ultimate team, and you know, multiple
Well,
time
it's
champion.
it's it's one of those cases like if you're a Canadian hockey fan, you know that if you're growing up in Manitoba in the 70s and 80s, you're going to play second fiddle to the Oilers of the Wayne Gretzky Oilers.
Yeah.
In a similar way, you and the Condors, the Foothill team of the Condors, they were just kind of the best ultimate team on the planet, and you guys happen to be their closest rivals. So the fact that you would win some games and come second almost all the time to those guys spoke to your greatness as well.
Well, thank you there. Yeah, well, they of course had great players, TK and T-Shep and Schmeckel and Merrill and all those guys, all those Hall of Famers. And we had some excellent guys too, usually a little bit younger than they had, and they had a few more horses than we had. But it was, we were good enough to play them close, and those were great times.
Well, I mean, when you look at some of those names we've already mentioned on the Foothill team, Charlie and Harold, Irv, Kalb, Stork, Ski, and John Z. Wayand. He was another dark horse in your roster. I mean, that's a powerhouse roster of names right there for those who are paying attention to the frisbee historians.
Well, John Wayne Z these days, right? He's absolutely great player. Goes way back. He was part of the Berkeley group, right? A great thumber, a great sidearm. The the legendary dream shot, his upside down thumber that came to him in a dream. He was famous for that. And I
Really?
guess he would, I guess in the time that I was playing with Foothill, I guess we kind of sort of stole him from the Pacific Coast Floaters, the
Okay.
West Coast kind of team, or yeah, truly the coastal team. And then he came and played Guts with us on Guts for Foothill. But yeah, great guy, absolutely great player.
Nice.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, we've kind of covered this already, but going back to a couple of things about Guts. '79, you won the World Guts Championship with Foothill. 80, you did that as well with Foothill. Won the World Championship in '80 as well, and so you successfully defended. And then in '82 at the IFT, you also were champions with Foothill. So that was you had a pretty good group there. It looks like you guys had a lot of fun.
We had a good run from 77 to 82. Um, the IFT was really the de facto World Guts Championship until 78 when the GPA came along. So then there were the GPA Worlds from 78 on. And uh, the bummer for us is that, and why I really envy those UP guys and the Michigan guys, is that we could only go back there once a year. I mean, it costs money, to get back there, and we could only really go back there once a year to play. So we had to choose: are we going to go for the Worlds this year, or go for the IFT this year? Both had similar reputations. It would have been great to win either one, but they had nationals, for instance, up there as well. We never went to a nationals, but there's so many guys who live in that area who went to the nationals, went to the IFT, went to the GPA Worlds every year, year after year after year, playing all these great teams. And sadly, we could never do that. But we were fortunate enough. I had to laugh when I first heard it. We played during the golden age of Guts, because that's when you had 32, 48 teams in a double elimination bracket tournament, playing Guts, and it kind of fell off after a while. That was the early 80s, late 80s and the 90s. It kind of fell off. Far fewer teams. In fact, I think they slid down to 3-on-3 instead of 5-on-5 after a while. But hey, all credit to the organizers and the players. It has gotten a bit of a resurgence. I think the IFT had a couple of dozen 5-on-5 teams, just a few weeks ago. It's definitely coming back, but it was great to play, Guts with so many good teams in a double elimination bracket. It's great fun, even though we only usually went back there with 5 guys, so we didn't have a whole lot of time to rest. But it was just great fun.
So I'm really curious. For someone, I'm in Toronto, and I know where the Upper Peninsula is just from my geography classes, but how remote is that? Where do you fly into? What is that like your first time going there? Was it as remote and wild an experience as it kind of sounds like it could have been?
Or did you drive all the way from LA?
Well, we would fly to Chicago,
Okay.
like I just did. You'd fly to Chicago, and then either you would drive or you would take a little puddle jumper plane up to the very tiny Houghton Airport or the very tiny Marquette Airport. And yeah, it's way up there. If you take a look at a map, it's like way up in the middle of the Lake Superior. And now the IFTs are always on July 4th. So I only went up there on July 4th. So it was summertime. It was light until 11:30 at night. It was great, but for the guys who lived up there in the winter, I can only imagine.
Oh my goodness!
If they get 25 feet of snow, in each and every winter, it's just ridiculous. But yeah, it is way up there for sure.
I've driven around. I've driven around Lake Michigan both directions. I've gone up over from the Wisconsin side, and I've gone over. I've crossed the Mackinac Bridge going both directions, so I have an idea of how far north you're talking about. And even in the summertime, it can be cold up there. Not cold to snow, but it's definitely it's a different part of the world than I live in now. I'm real close to the gates of hell right now. I don't know exactly where, but it's not far from the Dallas Fort Worth area for sure.
So hey, listen, we've talked about a bunch of names already, and we don't want to belabor the Lacey Park Boys, but certainly everybody should go to their Wikipedia and check out who the Lacey Park Boys are. You've already mentioned how Toronto did stand out with Guts. What was your relationship to Ken Westerfield? Do you remember your first meeting with Ken Westerfield? What kind of figure did he occupy in your imagination back in the day?
I probably saw Ken first at a Octat, New Brunswick, either 74 or 75 or both. And, I'm sure heard the stories. I mean, he was a great guy. All those Canadian guys are great guys and girls. They were all great. Um, Gail McCall, of course, and all those guys, and the Vancouver contingent too. But anyway, to your question, Ken was a great guy and uh, larger than life, and had one of the early great sidearms. And you have to remember this is so far back that you probably couldn't throw a sidearm yourself. I mean, that was just not something that a normal person did. So when you saw people like the Tom Monroes and the Ken Westerfields and the Kerry Colmar from New York City, and Victor, of course, Victor Malafronte, it was crazy. I mean, you could not throw. You couldn't keep a sidearm from flipping over if you tried. And here these guys are with their light plastic moonlighters, are keeping the hyzer on it and throwing it 120 yards. It's you watch it over and over again, and you just can't believe it. And Ken was one of those guys. When you heard his name being called for his turn to throw distance, you ran. You dropped what you're doing and you ran to watch him throw distance, just to see that thing just explode, out of his hand. Um, Great guy,
And
absolutely. And saw
did,
him subsequent years, many places, many tournaments. Just a super funny, super smart, and just a great player.
when you look at the photographs, he's got that kind of prototypical Berkeley hippie kind of look, the long hair, the big long beard. He kind of had almost a messianic appearance. Did he have that kind of frisbee leader quality back then? Did he have that charisma?
Oh, absolutely. He was a very thoughtful guy. When in fact I credit him with coming up with the concept of. I know this won't mean a lot to a lot of people, but he came up with the concept of the 10 round in DDC, one of our competitive rounds, and it's a really important round, great fun to play in, that answered a lot of problems that existed before it came into being, and uh, Ken was the guy who came up with that. He was an early DDC player and an
Wow.
early excellent DDC player. Was on the short end, more unfortunately, of some how should I put it, tournament deficiencies in the TDC structure, and he presented that to the IFA. Said, "Hey, why don't you guys do this?" And we did, and we've been doing it for 4 years. And he was like that. He was uh, not just a great player, but just very thoughtful, just a very smart guy.
Wow, that's
And like you
cool.
said, he's super tall, typically shirtless, the long, the flowing robes, the whole thing. It was just he really cut such a great figure. He really did.
Well, I mean, you when it comes to DDC and of all the sports out there, DDC is probably one that's most partner dependent. You've played a lot of DDC rounds with a lot of different partners. Obviously, the Duval brothers, and especially Charlie. You were very in the early days. You're very much known for being teammates with Charlie. But you played with a bunch of other people, and I just looking at the list, the name of the list. You came third at the Octat in '78 with Stork. You came second in the '82 WFC with Scott Zimmerman, Jim Herrick, Liz Herrick. The list goes on. Is there someone that if you could go back and play another round of DDC with, that you would just love to?
Well, all those guys and girls are sure, but I'll tell you, it was terrific fun playing DDC with Liz, because she was uh, as you might know, DDC, there are two positions, front and back. And so, for instance, all those names that you just described, most players could play just one or the other. So it's kind of easy to mix and match play with different partners, as you know, if you were a front and they were a back, or vice versa. It wouldn't take long to come up with just a little bit of your strategy and your calling scheme, and you could just jump on and start playing. But Liz was great. You know, we played in the open divisions. And she played back, and DDC is such a great game. It takes uh, such a broad skill set, especially for the back, who's the player who makes the call as to what's going to happen when the two discs are coming at the same time, whether one's thrown first or the other, or one's tipped, or all of that. And Liz made those calls, and she made them without error, uh, and made those calls against elite open, men's teams. And she was my partner for years, and it was really such a joy. And in fact, we were fortunate enough to win the. I think it was actually probably the last thing I won, the 1994 California State DDC Championships, which might not sound like much, but that tournament was really world championship caliber. The teams that we played, I mean, we played John Greensage and Tony Pellegrin in the final. If you know anything about DDC, those are two of the best guys to have ever played the game. And Liz beat them. Liz beat them as a back with her calling. And so, long answer to your question. I'd love to play another DDC game with Liz. That's for sure.
Well, just referencing that 1994 California State DDC Championships, you guys played in the Open division and against a very strong field of elite Open players, and you took it down. So that's fantastic that you're able to do that, and really to have a mixed pair win in the Open is kind of record book territory again.
We sadly we that was our lone win, but we made a number of semis. We it would typically finish very high in that aforementioned 10 round, and it was uh, again a great testament to the ability that Liz had to make the calls against the strongest, fastest guys who were throwing them down our throats. She would tell me what to do, and I would do it, and we'd get out of it. And it was, all credit to her.
Well, so that brings a question up for me to ask, and that is, was DDC a co-ed sport? Like it doesn't sound to like honestly, I haven't seen it, and that's another one of those things that another reason why I want to go to Virginia State is I want to see these games played that I haven't seen played before. But it doesn't matter what sex you are. It doesn't sound like. I mean, it sounds like you can have a mixed team, or you could have males or females. Is that the case?
Not exactly, and it also speaks to Liz, who of course was a champion ultimate player herself. Great hands, great physicality. There is a power element to it. I mean, there are people who will be throwing it at you full speed. You do have to catch it, and they will, and you have to, throw it back yourself. Um, uh, Perhaps not the same play, but also have a powerful throw. So it's not truly co-ed in that regard. I think most female players would be picked on, or could be picked on, by better um, uh, uh, male players. So it's really and so it's typically not open. Liz, a few other people, Mandy Carrera, excellent player. She was Liz's partner. I think they typically cleaned up when they played together in the women's division. It would take a special kind of female DDC athlete to play with the top guys, and Liz and Mandy are two that come to mind.
Wow.
Well, that's pretty interesting. Well, so this is something that it's still like I've known Conrad Damon for a long time. I met him in the late '90s in Southern California, and that dude's like drinking out of the fountain of youth or something. Because like I don't ever think of him being old enough to be in your group of frisbee players. Because I just met him playing Santa Cruz, and and playing, the Masters Cup, and it catches me off guard every time I see his name on a script, because it doesn't seem like he's old enough to be in that, to have been around in this time frame. But um, so
Oh,
Conrad was. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'd agree. I'd agree with you. He's a young guy. I consider him a kid. I mean, he wasn't playing with us way back in the day that I've described so far. He's a little bit after that. A little bit after that. Of course, he's become like one of the best players ever for sure, and still. But yeah, he was a little. I don't know exactly how old he is. Don't exactly know when he started playing, but it was a little bit after all that.
Well, I remember hearing about him doing running rounds at Santa Cruz in like 27 and 30 minutes, like playing, just one disc, but doing a running around. And like, I know Mike Randolph has told me a bunch of his times at different places too. And I don't know if he was competitive with Conrad at Santa Cruz or not, but it was shocking to me that he was doing that in a half an hour or less. And I'm just like going, well, what if did nothing go down the valley? I mean,
Yeah, he's one of those guys. I get to see him now and again. Always great time to be with Conrad.
Right on.
I mean, you could say,
there you go.
just picking up with Conrad. I mean, when we think about certain sports and the pinnacle of those sports, we think of a specific name. And through my research, I've discovered that Leonard Muse is definitely identified with discathon, and of course, well, maybe now it's a bit of a historical argument, but for those of us, we believe that the disc golf is imprinted with Kenny Climo's name. In the same way, you can't talk about the legacy of disc golf or DDC without talking about Conrad Damon. He's kind of the number one for a reason, and he'll stay that way as long as he's got tendons that'll be able to grab a disc in his hand. So it's wonderful to see the longevity and the kind of the pinnacle that he's reached with this sport. Whether it's open, whether it's mixed, he's at the top of all the disciplines of DDC.
Absolutely excellent player. DDC, like a lot of other disciplines, is a game of unforced errors, and it takes great mental resolve to not make those unforced errors. And very few people, through the course of a game, through the course of a tournament, has that kind of discipline. And besides having great physical skills as well. Conrad's one of those guys, and unbelievably steady, consistent player.
Well, you mentioned Leonard Muse in that, and Leonard was the first person that I ever met in 1994 at the Amateur World Championship in Sacramento that had disc merchandise. He had Maniac clothing, and he did had custom stamped discs and stuff like that. And he wasn't the very first, but he was one of the oldest, running. And I just ran into him, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago when I went and hung out with Roger Kanzler at the Berserkly Best Pairs tournament, and he was selling merch there again, like, almost 30 years later, 25 years later for sure. So it's interesting how some of these people are repeat offenders in our group.
Well, Leonard, absolutely terrific athlete. And I'm sorry if I thought maybe we were still talking about Conrad and DDC a moment ago, but yeah, Leonard and discathon. A discathon, I guess, was 82. Was that when we introduced that?
Maybe 81.
It's funny how it turned out, because you kind of thought that it was going to be the crazy X-track guys and girls who were going to just clean up in that event, and it really wasn't necessarily the case. There were, of course, guys and ladies like that who were very good, but it's still a substantially a throwing sport. You just have to be able to run quickly under trying circumstances as you make these challenging throws. And so it's not just going to be the guys who were the high school track stars. Um, it's it was a real mix of people who were the top discathon people. It helped to be able to run, but you certainly one bad throw and it didn't matter how much of a runner you were. You were back in the back. So it was a pretty great event, really, and it was fun how it sort of collected together the great throwers and the good/great runners to yield some kind of unexpected results sometimes.
Well, I feel
And
confident in saying that Paul and I would have been prolific spectators at that sport.
Yeah,
Prolific
I'd be
participants.
I'd be right there next to you.
well, and especially when you think that most often, I mean, the big glam finishing events were the World Frisbee Championships that was always held in July, early August in Los Angeles, and this was the era of before really the mass distribution of the catalytic converter, and so smog was a huge thing. The air quality was awful. I mean,
It
a lot
still
of
is.
the World Frisbee Championship reports that you read from back in the day, they were talking about, you'd have to have medics on site rushing to give oxygen to people who'd collapsed on the field, and these are the high intensity sports, frisbee sports, that you guys are expected to play at the peak world championship level. I, do you remember those days at the Irvine campus, at the Cal State campus?
Perfectly well.
Okay.
And well, Irvine is one of the places where we wanted to go to, and we did go to after those early Rose Bowl days because that was a bit south, a bit closer to the coast, a bit nicer weather. But those early days where um, the Caltech days, where the dorms were in Caltech, where we stayed. Then we went to before the finals at the Rose Bowl. We would play at the Rose Bowl fields. They have large fields around the Rose Bowl. So that's going to be the last week in August. Smoggy. We had oxygen tanks everywhere. It was
Wow.
it was just it was just really crazy, and it was one of the reasons why we, the IFA, were trying to petition WAML to move it elsewhere because it was very difficult physically. That was before just but throwing TRCs and MTAs and just doing anything in that heat and that smog was really very difficult. And just while we're kind of sort of on the subject, I sent along a couple of pictures about the Rose Bowl. The thing about the Rose Bowl, too, right, is that it held 100,000 people, kind of sort of it's in a north-south orientation. So that for that final day at the Rose Bowl, just so they wouldn't die, we had 50,000 people, a terrific draw for the World Frisbee
Yeah,
Championship,
that's amazing.
50,000 people. Oh, but we had to have them on the shady side of the stadium so they wouldn't be sitting in the sun all day. And so the stadium looked half full. And further, the photographers, the professional photographers, wanted to have the sun behind them. So when they took pictures of let's say the freestyle finals or the distance finals on the floor of the Rose Bowl, there would be an empty half stadium behind them. That's what the backdrop was. It looked like we jumped the fence, on some Saturday afternoon, and we're running around the Rose Bowl. And we tried. It's tough to argue against the cachet of the Rose Bowl, but we tried to tell people, why don't WAML? We tried to sell WAML on the idea of why don't we find a smaller college venue that holds 50,000 people? We'll fill it up and have the finals there. So here's a good example. The picture on the left is me throwing, and that's a professional photographer with the sun behind him. So all you see are empty stands. That happens to be Dave Lenapace, by the way. That's how most of the pictures look. Now the picture on the right. Now this is a guts demo. That's John Wyand. We just talked about Z. John on the right. Me Irv Calp, right above my elbow there, and behind them Steve and Charlie Duvall. Now this happened to be an amateur, so to speak, photograph. But look at the crowd. See, we had
Yeah.
50,000 people on
Yeah,
that.
it's a
Now
great question.
this wasn't the same year, but it could have been. It could have been the same
Right.
day. It's that we had 50,000 people that away and nobody that away. But it's just what you had to. It's just what you had to put up with when you had the Rose Bowl at the end of August, and it's always going to be incredibly hot and kind of smoggy.
So we've heard a little bit about the move in 1982 from the Rose Bowl to Rutgers. Do you have any more insights on how that happened and why that happened?
I don't. I don't know exactly. No, no is the answer to that. I don't really remember if we we tried to get the Rose Bowl that year, or if we even knew the year before that it wasn't going to happen. Um, I just don't remember that, and I can only guess that going to Rutgers, we did have sort of like an organizational contingent in place because of the early octads, um, and some ties with Rutgers University, of course. But I really don't know. I don't remember that. I should look that up. Why exactly the Rose Bowl didn't happen that
But
year.
it's interesting. It kind of lines up with what you were talking about, how you guys were exploring as an IFA to WAMO, exploring the idea of having it at other types of venues. And in 1882, it does go to a different type of venue.
Well, we
But
weren't. We certainly weren't trying to talk them into Rutgers. I mean,
no, no, of course,
it's more like trying to talk them into Irvine,
right.
or a Pepperdine, or a beautiful coastal collegiate setting, as opposed to the god awful sweltering Rose Bowl. But hey, you look at those pictures of the big old Rose Bowl. What are you going to say? That's it's tough to fight against that, for sure. But
50,000 satisfied customers.
that's it. Even though the Rose Bowl, even though Rutgers, the Rut Bowl, it was not the Rose Bowl, it was still the WFC, and it was still a wonderful time. The players were put up and fed, and we're all in the same place at the same time, having just great fun.
That really is kind of, to me, one of the things that's the most fascinating about all of it is just bring everybody there, bring them together, have them all stay in the same place. I mean, there's a lot of common threads from then to now, but one of the common threads now, from what I understand, is that the the guys and gals on tour, they've got groups that they hang out with, but they don't. It's not like the whole group. Like when I toured, we had Monday Fun Days, and that was like what The Price is Right was, a Monday Fun Day, one of the best ones ever. But like we'd go do something every Monday that wasn't golf, that wasn't frisbee, and like a lot of times it was amusement parks. Like Cedar Point up in Sandusky, Ohio, was probably the first three of them. Well, it was on the first 3 years, and then but we'd go other places too. But Monday Fun Days were really amazing, and from what I understand, there's not really any Monday Fun Days going on the tour anymore. And so, unfortunately, that kind of thing didn't carry over. But it's different times too.
Hey, remember also, there's a lot of talk about the overall championships, overall players. When you're talking about WFC back in the day, of the 125 or so competitors, there might have been maybe six legitimate contenders to win the overall. Most people didn't go to an overall tournament because they were overall players, and certainly not looking to win it realistically. Only a few could make a claim like that. There were many people, like for instance me, who might go there because we had a chance of winning an event, and an outside chance maybe of winning a second one. Um, but there were a good number of people like that, and then a good number of I'll call them journeyman players who were good in many events. Were able to qualify through the course of the year at the qualifying tournaments, but they were not overall players. They were going to come in 40th or 50th, overall, across all the events. You mostly went there because it was going to be one of the times of your life. You were, if you were a really good freestylist, remember back then, WFC, you won freestyle, you were the world freestyle champion. If you won distance, you were the even golf, a better example. You won golf, you were the world golf champion, especially in those early years. So you were looking to maybe play in those events if that was your specialty. But hey, you played in all of them, and you stayed in the dorms with everybody else, and you went to the cafeteria with everybody else. You got on the bus with everybody else, and it was just that's a little thing I had. These were always great. The WFC reviews. So you're staying in the dorm, and you play, you party, you wake up the next morning, you go to the cafeteria, and there's a stack of these reviews, and the reviews have the schedule for the upcoming day. It has all the stats from the previous day, and guys like me and the rest of the staff were up till two in the morning the night before putting this together for these people, and then lots of fun editorial stuff, and we had graphic people on staff, getting all the little tidbits from the day before. So there again, what a great time! You just tumble down into the cafeteria that morning. You see what's happening. Coming up that day, what happened the day before, some crazy story about, in fact, I think I just saw it in here, some crazy thing that happened the day before is going to be covered. Like, for instance, the day that Hardman lost a disc in the lake, so
we've heard that story before.
he stripped down and jumped in, but that was every day. You'd have six of these, 7 of WFC reviews, and they were just great fun. I remember doing those stats.
That's amazing in itself.
Remember that we're talking
the real days of cutting and pasting, right?
No, forget computers.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, you actually cut it and pasted it, and then started.
No spreadsheets. We had calculators. We had what was called a big board that we just write by hand, that people could see as they walked in, yeah, I again don't want to complain. I had a great time, but I missed a lot of serious partying because we were up until God knows when, each and every night, getting the stats ready.
So you would read these reports of the parties and be like, I can't believe they're doing shower guts, flapjack guts. I missed all of these things. I missed the shower karaoke, and here I am putting it all together, cutting and pasting with my T-square.
Well, like I said, don't feel sorry for me. I did squeeze in my fun, but we did have to do all that. That's for sure.
Well, the fascinating thing is just that fraternal feeling. Everybody going through 130, 140 people all together, and this is during Whammo's supremacy. So everybody who made it, who got invited to the World Championships, they got flown in there, and so they were taken care of. They had itineraries, they had food plans, they had accommodations. It was just sign up, show up, and hang out with your friends and friends that you're about to meet. And I imagine for everybody that went to those, it was truly a defining moment at that point in their lives.
Oh, it was absolutely one of the times of your life, and it's what made all those qualifying tournaments. So the whether it was the National Championship Series in 76, 77, or the North American Series 78, 82. Those were the qualifying meets. You had to go to as many as you could, score as many points as you could, to qualify for WFC. And we didn't know until the final day how many people were going to be able to come. It was above my pay grade. It was mostly a budgetary thing, but it was going to be based on how many points people. We would rank everybody in terms of the points they scored in those qualifying tournaments, and it was however much money however far down we can go and take as many people as we could. And if you knew you were kind of sort of, on the bubble or close to it, it was pretty stressful when you were going to those last couple of tournaments of the year,
Okay.
in the midsummer, trying to make it there, and it was a terrific disappointment because if you just missed out again, there were people who every year somebody just missed out,
Yeah.
and what a bummer that would be.
Well, we just saw
So
it this week at the Olympics where, the girls on the floor exercised. One score was turned in, and then the coaches protested it, and the girl that originally was put up on the big board that she won the silver or the bronze medal during the protest edged her out. And like it was great to see for the American gymnasts, but it was heartbreaking to watch that girl, see that she won and then have it taken away from her. Like it was. I understand the one side of it, but there's no way that you can explain away the heartbreak that lady felt after she got that medal taken away. And I'm sure that's the same kind of heartbreak that those folks experienced as well.
Oh yeah, the Olympic heartbreak of the whole every 4 year thing. I just can't imagine what that must be like.
Wait for
But
another. Come back next time. 28.
yeah,
We'll see
yeah.
you in that smog in LA.
Ha. So okay, so we're talking Rutgers. We're talking uh, from our perspective, our privileged historical perspective. We know at the time that that's the last World Frisbee Championships. When you go out to Rutgers, when you're part of the IFA team that's putting this together, did you have any inclination that that could have been the last?
oh for sure. We we knew. Um, there was a change in at WAMO leadership. The executive team, um, uh, and it was not going to be um, quite as friendly, to the tournament experience as it had in the past. Um, so I think the writing was on the wall that the WFC per se was going to perhaps be the last one. Um, of course, there were many great U.S. Opens that were put on after that, so it's not like the sport of or the overalls or the sport was going to come to any screeching halt. But the good old days of the WFCs, yeah, we kind of sort of knew that there's an excellent chance that uh, Rutgers would be the last one. And in fact, I certainly didn't know, but it was just months later that WAMO was sold after the Rutgers WFC. Um,
Right.
uh, I mean, the company itself,
Right.
was purchased, and so there are going to be changes that come from that. Um, and it's also, it doesn't directly apply, but it's always a good thing to remember. Um, we used to talk about it all the time. Um, uh, Especially a little bit farther back in the 70s. What you kind of have to remember is, again, this was way back when, right? Before kids had their phones and streaming devices and Game Boys and all of that. What they did have was Saturday morning cartoons. Every kid in the world,
Oh yeah.
watched Saturday morning cartoons on the 2 or 3 channels on the television that would show them. And a well placed ad from a company like Wow, during Saturday morning cartoon uh, time, uh, is how they did their biggest and best and most important advertising.
Wow.
And it was pretty well known. It was told to us, sometimes directly, sometimes thinly veiled, that the entire operating budget of the annual operating budget of the IFA, was equivalent to a handful of well placed Saturday morning television ads, and and in terms of the marketing value of what, a couple thousand players uh, going to a couple of dozen tournaments and then a world championship. Yeah, there's definitely a marketing value there, but there's also a marketing value to to a couple of great Saturday morning commercials as well, and they were kind of sort of equivalent. And that could just be a line item decision, across the ledger at at,
Hmm.
uh, at any time. And similarly, hand in hand with that, again, think of those same players, 1,000 players buying Ed's discs, the Midnight Flyers, which of course were Whammo discs. They were going to be getting money for that, and the world class discs in the mid and late '70s. 1,000 or so players, buying that, um, and multiple copies or many discs per player. Um, how does that compare to the buying an 89-cent regular in a plastic bag at a shop that sells suntan lotion and flip flops next to a beach? I mean, Whammo made as much money in half of a Saturday, selling 89-cent regulars, um, than they did, make selling all of the the high performance world class discs, uh, for sure. And so for them, it was just a decision. It was just a corporate
Yeah.
decision to make. And fortunately, they made that right decision for the longest time because they fully supported our sport. But hey, it was a business, and they were a big little toy company that had two monster toys, monster products, and they got to deal with that as they wished, and fortunately they got it right for a long time. But that sort of changed a little bit come '82, come the Kransco years, and subsequent to that the Mattel years. I was gone by then. I
Okay.
left Whammo right after the '82 Rose Bowl, but yeah, it changed after that, and business is business.
I mean, it's one of those things where if you're on the one side of the Whammo curve, you think this is it, what's going to happen, the whole world's going to fall apart. But as we know, nature abhors a vacuum, and in rushed the Selinsky and the Duval and boys and Dave Donapace, and they came in with their beveled edge disc, and that gave a new lift to the whole. And a year or two prior to that, you've got Jim Kenner and Gail McCall coming in with the Sky Styler, and that's bringing new life into the whole flying disc horizon. That maybe if someone thought the sun set and rose on Whammo alone, this is the world is coming to an end when Wham was getting sold. So, obviously we know the history of things that turned out differently, but just interesting to wonder at that perspective, the historical perspective. You were a
Hey
very
guys,
integral part of it.
guys,
Good.
this is gonna make you laugh, but I gotta run to the bathroom. I'll be right back.
Well, it's funny because I was about to say we're getting way past our good times hour, and we're getting close to the wrap up time. But now Mace has left us, so um, we'll wait till he comes back to do the final see is. But I want to pick up on what you just said about 82. After 82 Rutgers, you left Whammo. What happened there? What were the circumstances? You left before the sale to Kransco.
Um, yeah, I mean, it was for me personally. I mean, it was nothing exciting. I was there for 7 years. I um, I did quit school as we covered previously, so it was time to go back to school. It was
Okay.
time to have a career in a real job, and I continued to play like most normal people, are not going to be, well, maybe these days, but back then there weren't too many truly full time players, right? You went to school, you had a career, and you played as much as you could on the
Yeah.
side. So I did that, but yeah, I I went back to school. I
Okay.
went. I left California, went back to the East Coast, and thought I was going to go to school there, but I did for a while. But then I wound up going back west and went to school back there. So still saw the same people. So went to all of those opens in La Mirada, did Dan Mangoni put on and all of that. But yeah, that's what happened to me. It was a long time. I mean, 7 years at the IFA, too much fun. I felt obligated to move on.
Well, it's a hell of a story, and certainly your contributions way outpace just the definition of the grip itself. Just looking at the fact that you were working for the company that was directly responsible for promoting the frisbee lifestyle at the time, that places you right in the middle of the whole matrix, and that's really cool to be. And I hope that others are fascinated with the trajectory of your story as much as I am, for sure. We could spend the whole night talking to you, but of course we've got to cut this short. Mace, do you have anything you want to wrap up with Al and
Well,
what we've been talking
it's,
about?
I mean, I don't know that I could put anything else into, just a few seconds or a few sentences, but it's really, I have to second what Paul just said there. And the fact that, like, we talked earlier, and you say you don't really have any fascinating road stories, but you your stories are also equally as fascinating because they were what created the need for the road, and it's like what I said earlier about the way that, I mean, to me it's incredibly fascinating that in a lot of ways y'all started the trend of using those big buildings for something other than football, and you look at the evolution of that now, and everything from frisbee to monster trucks and all stops in between have taken place in all these different stadiums, and it all goes back to that, and it really, well, I mean, part of my life I owe to that too, because I've worked in a lot of those buildings now too, and not just stadiums but arenas too, and they weren't really used for much other than the original intention back in the 70s, and all of a sudden then in the 80s and the 90s and the on beyond that, there's just any number of events that might be going on at any given time in any one of those big buildings, or medium sized or small buildings. So part of the
Hey,
evolution of entertainment.
it was great fun. I was privileged to be a part of it, and I really should have said it many times through the course of this talk. But such a privilege working with Stork. Working at the IFA,
I can only imagine.
somehow somehow having such a nice chunk of money from Whammo to do with not exactly as we please, but almost as
Right.
players who were just trying to form a sport, form an endeavor, a tournament circuit and a championship series. For other players, we were doing it because we loved it. We loved what they loved. We had some money to work with, and it was a very fortunate time and a great time, and I just loved every minute of it.
No, that's fantastic. Well put. And we would definitely, it's on our bucket list to be able to have Stork on the show, because there are a lot of burning questions in terms of disc golf history and timelines we'd love to have. And if you have enjoyed it all, any of your time today with us, maybe you could help us lobby to have Stork on the show for future reference.
Well, my lobbying success with him is a little weak, but hey, I'll give it a shot.
Well, the other thing that I would add to that too is that, like, Tita gave me your information, and she's definitely one of our assistant booking agents, and if you want to fill any of those kind of roles, send me the info. I'd be glad to contact anybody you think might be great on this show,
No,
because
that,
we really want to tell the stories. I mean, Paul and I are talkers, and we're storytellers, and we're story listeners, and honestly, I mean, I think I can speak for Paul on this too, but I had no idea at all what I was getting myself into when I started this. I mean, it the original goal was, I'm living in the Dallas Fort Worth area. Paul lives in Toronto. He's one of my best friends in the world, and he doesn't live anywhere near me. And it's that friendship was created, the same way that you created all your friendships in the 70s, and you still have those folks with you today, and from a friendship standpoint. And I just wanted to interact with Paul on a regular basis again. And I was like, well, I kind of got fascinated during COVID with the comedians' use of podcasts. And I was like, well, we could do that. And, then we could interact on a regular basis. And instantly we had a great time with it. And this is no exception to that
And
statement.
now we get to meet new awesome people like
All
yourself,
these,
and
yeah, like all these people that
new
helped
to
get us
us.
here, and you're absolutely one of the people that was at least for your shifts, you were driving the bus back then, and there was a lot of other bus drivers too. But we like talking to every one of you.
Yeah.
Hey, well, thanks so much. And it was great fun to watch the other talks of the Marinis and Tita. Hers was one of the first I watched. She sent me the link and made me watch it. It was thoroughly enjoyable. Yeah. Um, uh, Patty's talk, of course, our interview was just great because we shared that house and worked at the IFA together. And it was delightful for me to hear all those guys tell those stories from the old days, and I'm so glad that others who weren't there got to hear that as well. It's again, and it comes down to you guys. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for giving people that opportunity.
It's truly our pleasure.
Truly our pleasure. So thank you, Al. Thanks for taking a big long chunk of your time here tonight to unravel some more stories about frisbee and flying disc sports. And we're absolutely privileged that you're here with us, and thank you. And we can't say enough great things about what you've done for the sport.
Yeah.
The only thing
Too
that I would
kind.
add to that, the only thing that I would add to that is I'm looking forward to meeting you in person.
Yeah.
Let's do it sometime.
Maybe
Nice.
Virginia State's games last weekend next year. Who knows?
I imagine I'll be there. So try to make it.
All right, that's
All
great.
right, let's put that on the bucket list. Until then, though, Al, we'll cross paths. But until then, you just keep doing what you do, spread the light, spread the love, and keep flying the jam.
Hey, thanks, guys. Hope to
Thank
see you
you,
soon.
sir.
Thanks, Al.
I know.
All right, have a good one, everybody. Thanks for stopping by, and this is available on Spotify and Apple Music if you didn't already know that. So check us out. Have a good evening, everybody.
See you.